Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman, private investigator, digital forensic investigator, blogger, author of the book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator. We're here on freedomslips.com every Friday evening at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Studio A. And tonight we're going to have a really good show. A big guest is an author and a film producer, and he's an expert on the OJ Simpson trial. And I've been reviewing his material, and this is real professional work that I'm very impressed with, that I haven't seen out in the public that much. So I'm really looking forward to having our guest tonight. I just want to bring up my guest last week, Jim Rothstein, probably our most popular guest we've ever had on here. And the show is up on YouTube. Jim Rothstein is the cop who he arrested Frank Sturgis as Sturgis was on his way to assassinate a witness in the Kennedy assassination. And it's a fascinating interview, and I invite everybody to go take a look at it up on YouTube. The station has a YouTube channel called Revolution Radio, and I have my own YouTube channel called The Opperman Report. Next week coming up, we have Pat Brown, criminal profiler, Pat Brown, and you've seen her on Court TV and HLN and Dr. Drew and all those shows. And we're going to be talking about some interesting stuff. She's very passionate about a lot of trials, like John Benet Ramsey and the McCain, Madeleine McCain, who was kidnapped, I believe it was in Portugal. But she also has a book she wrote about a theory she has that Cleopatra was assassinated. So that's next week is criminal profiler Pat Brown. We got some big guys coming up after that. We have Daniel Hopsicker, the 9/11 investigator who did all this work about Muhammad Atta and interviewed his stripper girlfriend, and all about drug smuggling down at these airports down there in Florida. And after that, we have McGowan, Dave McGowan, who wrote the book about Laurel Canyon, and he has a lot of fascinating work as well. But tonight we have on the line, our guest is Thomas Johnson, and he's the investigative team coordinator for the Ocean Medical Investigative Group. And he's an author of the book Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson Murder Trial and Its Hidden Secrets. And that book is mostly about phone records that exonerate OJ Simpson. Now, Mr. Johnson is also the producer of a fascinating documentary entitled Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson murder trial. So, Thomas, are you there?
Yes, I am, Ed. Thank you for having me on this evening.
Welcome, my friend. I just want to mention also, too, that both of these, the book and the video, I have a link to them up on my website, my blog, the Opperman Report blog, and also to another book that was written by Dr. Henry S. Johnson that's related to this group here, this Ocean Medical Investigative Group, and it's called Double Cross for Blood, O.J. Simpson's Constitutional Disaster. And Thomas was nice enough to send me all three of these items, two of these books, and the video. And I'm extremely impressed with the professionalism and the thoroughness of this investigation, the way they put it out and laid it out. So, Thomas, can you tell us about yourself and how you got involved in all this?
Well, I got involved with this back in the fall of 1996. The individual that you spoke of that is the author of Double Cross for Blood is my brother, Dr. Henry S. Johnson. And around September or October of 1996, he was in his office, and, you know, the O.J. Simpson trial was still hot and heavy in people's minds, even though it had been over for a year. And someone heard him say that he certainly would like to be able to review the autopsy reports. Well, the person who heard him say that was his patient, was employed by the Medical Examiner's Department of Los Angeles County. And subsequently, both of those autopsy reports appeared in a manila envelope on my brother's desk. And after he finished dealing with his patients for that particular evening, he was there by himself, and he opened up the manila envelope and began to examine the autopsy reports. And I think a few days later he called me. I was in Minneapolis, living in Minneapolis where we grew up at the time, he was in Los Angeles, California. He called me and he says, well, Tommy, you know that I've been reviewing these autopsy reports on both Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Lyle Goldman. And he says, you know, they weren't killed in the manner of the testimony during the criminal trial. And so, you know, I listened to him and so forth at long distance, but maybe about 4 weeks after that, I found myself out in Los Angeles. He picked me up at the airport, and we went over to his office. And in his office, he has this anatomical skeleton that hangs down from a scaffolding. It hangs vertically. And so we were talking, and he says, well, what do you know about, you know, how these people were killed? And I said, well, you know, the sensationalized version is that Nicole Brown Simpson was almost decapitated, you know. And he says, and my understanding that it was a person who was right-handed wielding a single-edged knife. So he says, okay, well, here's a single-edged knife. Go over there on that dummy and show me how you would carry this out. And so I went over there and I grabbed the dummy, put my hands over the mouth. I said, well, they probably muffled the person because it looks like they were in a close-quartered condominium setting. So you certainly wouldn't want anybody yelling out loud. So I put my hand over the left hand over the mouth, and then I slid the single-edged knife underneath the throat, slit the throat, and said, that's it. He said, okay. He said, but look here in this autopsy report. He said, you see these 4 deep stab wounds on the left side of the neck? And I said, yeah. He said, show me how you would put those 4 deep stab wounds into the left side of the neck. So now I'm still standing behind the dummy, and I've approached the dummy, got my left hand over the mouth, slide the right hand under the throat, repeat it again, and the only thing I can think of doing is backhanding the knife into the left side of this dummy's neck. And so my brother says, well, that's you know, really not that probable, but let's assume that you did that. He said, tell me, what direction is the sharp edge of the blade pointing? And I said, well, it's when I slit the throat and reached around and stuck the knife in the left side of this dummy's neck, the sharp side of the blade is pointing eyes forward. The dull side, the blunt side of the blade is pointing over the shoulder. He says he reads the autopsy reports in terms of how the actual medical examiner described the exit wounds, and after he's reading it to me, he's telling you that the medical examiner, Dr. Irwin Golden, is stating that the sharp edge of the knife is not pointing eyes forward, but is pointing over her left shoulder. So go back to that dummy and show me how you can put the sharp edge of the blade over the left shoulder. So I went back there, and out of my frustration, I finally threw the knife into the air to reverse it, and then stabbed it into the left side of the neck, so the blade was showing over the left shoulder, which made him start laughing. So I said, well, how was this done then, from your perspective? He said, put the knife in the left hand. He said, can't you stick that knife into the left side of the dummy's neck 4 times underneath the ear? Can't you insert it in the neck? And I did that 4 times. He says, what direction is the blade pointing? I said, over the left shoulder. He said, can't you slit the throat starting up underneath the right ear and coming across the midline of the throat? I said, yes. And then he showed me something else. In order to decapitate anyone, you've done this before and I've done it, people squinch their neck. And when you squinch your neck, you can feel the tightness of the muscles in your neck. That muscle that holds your head on both sides of your neck is called the strap muscle. you have to have a lot of power to be able to cut through that strap muscle. Not only, the carotid artery, which was severed as well, but going through that powerful strap muscle. When you were trying to come from with your right hand from the left side coming back up to underneath the right ear, you begin to lose power in your right arm if you are slitting the throat. But if you start underneath the right ear with your left hand, you've got all of the power in the world if you're left-handed. So that became the first issue. And I thought that my brother was pretty convincing in terms of nullifying this idea that there was a single right-handed assailant wielding a single-edged knife in the right hand.
Okay, let me see if I understand this. You're saying that your brother, he was talking about the Simpson trial. Somebody slipped him a copy of the autopsy report.
Both autopsy reports on Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Lyle Goldman.
And he got these under the table.
Okay.
Okay. Now, did you ever find out, or does he think he knows who got that to him?
If he did, he hasn't told me.
Okay.
And after what I've seen happen to people that have been associated with our investigative organization over a period of time, I can understand that people would want to remain anonymous. We have gone through a couple of attorneys who have been threatened and intimidated in certain ways. It took us a long time to be able to get an attorney that could work with us in terms of this whole affair.
Sure, it was a big money-making operation. A lot of people got rich and famous off this trial.
Well, those are people if you wanted to go along with the narrative, if you were willing to go along with the narrative that was out there that OJ committed these murders, yeah, you could get rich.
Yeah, right. So nobody wants to rock the boat.
But if you took the other side and you came into court to raise questions about these irregularities, one attorney who was working with us, who was interesting because that attorney really, really thought that they had it together, that I'm an attorney, I'm licensed, you guys are not attorneys, and when I go into this courtroom, they're going to listen to what I have to say because I'm an attorney. Well, they kind of slam dunked this person to the point to where we have that person on video. I didn't include it in the documentary Serpents Rising, but I have a lot of file footage, and I remember the picture of that person when they came out of that courthouse. They looked like they had been, struck by a truck, like a deer in the headlight, bam, and then we got a call about 3 or 4 days later from that same attorney where that attorney says, I can't work with you anymore. I have a $200,000 grant that has been promised to me to teach this law class at this particular school, and they've told me that if I continue on with you people talking about OJ Simpson being innocent of committing these murders, then I'm going to lose that grant.
It's very interesting because right at the beginning of this whole situation, Howard Weitzman, OJ's first attorney, took himself right off the case and let OJ go in there and walk in there without an attorney to be questioned by the police. Well, what do you think about that?
Well, if he did that, I didn't know that it had occurred that way. I thought that he pitched the ball off to Robert Shapiro, but you're correct because OJ came back from Chicago on the same day that the bodies were discovered. So he did go into to the police department and sat down and volunteered a lot of information, just, innocently volunteering it because he believed that he was innocent. But you're right. In no way should he have gone in there without the advice of an attorney, without the attorney in his presence. But he did that, you know. So
yeah, I totally agree. No one who's ever any involvement with the police should speak to the police without an attorney present. It's just that it's our right to that attorney present, and it's in our best interest, because when you walk into the police station, it's very clear that they're in your best interest. Now, real quick, I want to get back to these stab wounds you were discussing, because your brother got a hold. The doctor in this case, your brother's a doctor who testifies in court, I believe, in medical cases. Am I correct?
Yes.
He got a hold of the autopsy photos, the autopsy report, the entire report. Now, in your video that you sent me, Serpents Rising, there's some illustrations of the stab wounds. Now, those are identical from the autopsy report?
Those have come from the autopsy. If you see the diagrams of the individuals, those come directly from the autopsy reports.
Okay, so then if anybody were to buy this video, and it's very cheap, okay, it's very inexpensive, for the amount of work that went into this video, I'm very impressed with it. This is high-quality production. They can see these illustrations from the autopsy report, and any layman with the naked eye can see that those are two different kinds of knives that did those wounds. Right.
And that was the issue regarding Ron Goldman, that if you access Serpents Rising online, you can watch it online at Amazon.com, instant videos. You will hear my brother going through the scenario of reconstructing how the attack probably had taken place, just based upon the exit wounds found on the victims' bodies. And basically what my brother is saying is that Ron Goldman was being attacked by a right-handed individual who was wielding what appears to be a double-edged knife or a dagger. And Ron, if you look at the image that I placed in the documentary, which came from his autopsy protocol, you will see that the medical examiner has shown you where he has received about 23 stab wounds to the right side of his face and neck. Now, my brother had pointed out that based upon Dr. Irwin Golden's examination, that all of those wounds were supplemental wounds, that they were non-fatal wounds, and that it appeared that Ron might have had enough strength to hold on to whoever was attempting to stab him with the dagger in the right side of his face. He might have had just enough strength to keep him from stabbing him deeply, but he was popping him with this double-edged knife in the right side of his face. The actual injury that was fatal to Ron Goldman was an injury that he received to the right side of his torso, as if a left-hand boxer was striking the right side of another boxer's body. And the only thing is, the left-hander had a single-edged knife in his hand. And when he stuck this knife into Ron, it went through his rib cage and punctured the bottom of his aorta. And that caused Ron to bleed internally, and he died from internal bleeding. He did have the left jugular vein severed, but my brother pointed out venous pressure is about 20 pounds per square inch. Arterial pressure is about 120 pounds per square inch. So unlike Nicole Brown Simpson, who had her right carotid artery slit, he said that within a second, once that carotid artery was slit, she became like 130 pounds of dead weight right there. And you can imagine holding a water hose that, you know, you've squeezed it and the pressure is coming out, the water is coming out, and it is eating at 120 pounds per square inch. You know, and you've seen rubber hose flopping all over the place. Well, that's what he envisions would happen in terms of the blood skeeting out of the artery. But he points out that when the vein is cut, because of the adrenaline rush, the person still has the ability to punch and to kick and to attempt to defend himself and possibly run off and get to the hospital. But once that lefty hooked him in the right side with that single-edged knife, and we know that it is in all probability was a left-handed individual who did that, because the sharp side of the blade of the single-edged knife is pointing at the attacker, and the blunt side of the single-edged knife that went into Ron's torso is pointing towards his rear. So it's like an individual hooked with that knife and hooked strongly, and it went in, punctured his rib cage, and it nicked the bottom of the aorta, which is an artery that's under 120 pounds of pressure as well. And basically you got a lot of blood skeeting out, but inside, and they finally died. If you've seen pictures of Ron Goldman, his shoes, his hands, and other parts, you'll see that Ron Goldman put up a valiant fight, because all the bottom of his hiker boots are scarred up, like he was kicking someone. And you see knife cuts on the bottom of those hiker boots. But if you look at the autopsy photographs of Ron's hands, Ron has swollen, bloody knuckles, or at least blood welts across several of his knuckles. So whoever he was hitting, he had to have been hitting bony tissue, not soft tissue, because the type of scars and so forth and bruises that he has on his knuckles is kind of like if you've ever hit a concrete wall and scraped your knuckles, Right. And that's what his knuckles look like. And as time goes on, pictures of both Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman have been posted on the internet, those death photos. So we've compiled a lot of this stuff over time.
Well, let me ask you this then. What about the medical examiners who testified both for the defense and the prosecution at the trial? There was a lot of shenanigans going on with that as well, wasn't there?
Right. The actual medical examiner was an individual by the name of Dr. Irwin Golden. Now, let me set this up.
Sure.
When I got through going through my shenanigans trying to, perform the hit on this dummy that's hanging down in my brother's medical office, I was frustrated, and I turned to him and I said, well, how could this doctor who signed this autopsy report disagree with you? And he said, Tom, this doctor who signed the autopsy report, he wasn't the doctor who testified in OJ's trial. And when my brother said that, I was dumbfounded, because I thought that, like a lot of people, I saw the trial, I knew what was going on, so where did I miss it? But I told him, I said, well, listen, when I get back to Minneapolis, I know a librarian that is retired who thought that this case was going to be so important that they began taping every element of this case, starting with the preliminary hearing, going all the way through the end of the trial. So when I got back to Minneapolis, I contacted that individual, and I said, could you pull all of the medical testimony that took place in that trial? And within a week's period of time, that individual had provided me, I think, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, provided me 6 tapes. 54 through 58 was the testimony of the substitute doctor who was the longest prosecution witness called in the OJ Simpson trial. That individual was on the witness stand for 9 days. His name is Dr. Lakshmanan Sadivaraswaran, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I believe that he is from the subcontinent of India. He was the chief medical examiner. The 6th tape that was provided to me was...
Oh, we're coming up to a break. When we come back, we'll finish up this about the medical examiner, who was the chief medical examiner, who testified that it's the first time he ever testified at a murder trial when the actual doctor who performed the autopsy was available to testify. Okay, which is pretty amazing testimony, which is why I love this video, Serpents Rising, who the producer, we have with us today, the producer of Serpents Rising, T.H. Johnson, who's the head of this medical investigative group, the Ocean Medical Investigative Group, along with his brother, who's Dr. Henry Johnson, and they've written another book, Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson Murder Trial. And they have some incredible information. Time's going so fast, I hope we can get to everything. Just incredible information in this book, these videos. Thank you.
You're listening to...
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman, and before we get back to our guest, Thomas Johnson, who's the author of Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the O.J. Simpson Murder Trial, and also the producer of an amazing documentary called Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the O.J. Simpson trial. Both of these are available on Amazon.com, and they're available up on my blog, The Opperman Report. But first, I want to remind everybody that this is a listener-sponsored station. We have no corporate sponsors. So if you want to support our station, you have to visit the website, which is called freedomslips.com, and click on the donate button. And I'd also like to thank my producer, Ann, for all her help during the week and during the show, booking guests and lining up people, scheduling things, just being a great helper. And our other producer, Christoph Moses, who's our technical producer, who helps get all the videos up on YouTube and edit stuff, and does some editing too. Everybody's editing but me. I don't edit. Okay. But back to our guest here, Thomas Johnson. Thomas, before we got the break came up, we were talking about the testimony of the medical examiner. So go on with that, please.
Well, basically what I was saying to you is that my brother asked me if I could go back, once I got back to Minnesota, could I make contact with this librarian that I told him had taped the whole trial from beginning to end, including the preliminary hearing. And so, as I said before, I had 5 tapes which represented 9 days of the chief medical examiner's testimony. The problem was the chief medical examiner had not participated in the autopsy report. And if you see in the documentary, he's under cross-examination by Robert Shapiro, and he asked him, how many times this year have you testified for a doctor who has already performed the autopsy that was available to testify? And his response was, never. He says, how many times last year did you testify for a doctor who has already performed the autopsy and was available to testify? His response again was, never. He says, how many times in the last 15 years that you have been the chief medical examiner for Los Angeles County have you testified for a doctor who has performed the autopsy that was available to testify? And he started to say never immediately, and then he stopped, and he says, well, I have testified to supplement what one of my doctors has already stated on the witness stand, but to answer your question, no, never. Now, that was his testimony. That was Dr. Lakshmanan. This is the first time in history of Los Angeles County that type of testimony has probably ever taken place, and that was the O.J. Simpson trial.
Right.
Doctor that never participated in the autopsies, never examined the bodies, didn't even go to the murder site until 6 months after the murders had taken place. But this is the person who is part of the narrative that America has been programmed with to set the table that OJ Simpson was the right-handed assailant wielding a single-edged knife that killed this individual.
Now, let me ask you a question, Thomas. If I were to see that, and what I thought all along until I saw your video and I read your book and I started talking to you, was that, because I'm familiar with that testimony, and I just thought, well, you know what? The guy wanted to be in the limelight. It's a political decision to put him on there and have him testify. What do you think happened? Why do you think they put him? Go ahead.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. After I reviewed, it took me all week to review those tapes. I mean, that was some of the most boring minutia that you would want to hear. And I think it was used to lull the people to sleep so that he could do something that you wouldn't pay attention to, which was in contradiction to the other doctor whose tape was tape number 5. Now, this gentleman, this retired librarian, was so meticulous in terms of keeping his notes and labeling these tapes that he had produced that he could go immediately and find what you wanted. And here was tape number 5, which implied that it had been testimony a year before this doctor even got on the witness stand. And it took place during the 7th day of the preliminary hearing. And it was the only time that the actual doctor who performed the autopsies ever was on the witness stand. And that doctor was Dr. Orwin Golden, the gentleman who actually signed the autopsy reports. And in his testimony, part of it that we put to contrast with what Dr. Lakshmanan was saying, you will hear him being asked the question, he said he had, based upon his examination of the bodies, that he used the word morphologically. He had morphologically determined that there was 2 distinctive types of knife wounds found on the victims' bodies based upon the exit wounds. Then he took his time to thoroughly state what those knives looked like. He said the first knife, exit wounds indicated that it was a single-edged knife, and then he went through explaining the other knife that was tapered on both sides. The wounds were tapered on both sides, indicated the entry of a double-edged knife wound. Well, I don't think that this is the testimony. In fact, it's not what I think. I know that this is not the testimony that the prosecution wanted. They wanted one knife, one man, and that knife wielded in the hands of a right-handed individual. This is why this second doctor was brought in, because if you look at the testimony of the first doctor who actually performed the autopsy, he was having problems. I've analyzed him time and time again, and it appears he was having a problem going against what he knew, even though he seemed to be trying to couch his testimony so that it would fit the narrative of the prosecution. It's just like you or I when we've done something that we know this isn't what I did, but you're trying to tell it in a manner to make it fit the narrative.
I got you. And just to be clear for the audience, both of these witnesses were prosecution witnesses. And we have one, the original one, is saying, hey, there was probably 2 knives. And then they bring it. They say, well, you get lost. And they bring in the chief medical examiner, who's the head of the whole department. They bring him in. He's never testified before when there was the doctor who performed the autopsy was available. And he turns around and says, oh, no, definitely one knife. But now, Thomas, and what about the defense? What did they put on a witness to Go ahead.
No.
No.
And, a lot of question marks are raised behind that question that you just asked me. And certain things did not become clear to me until this year, until 2013, let me put it that way. And in 2013, while I was checking something relative to my book and stuff at Amazon, whenever you go to Amazon, it will always tell you, oh, you like this? Well, here's another book that you might like, okay? And I've read a number of books. There are over 239, at least at the time that I began working on this documentary in 1999, and it took me till 2004 to compile all of what I needed to say that I'm satisfied in putting this documentary out. There were 239 book titles related to the OJ Simpson case. So I've read some of them, and, you know, what I find is that you will find some pertinent information in a number of those books. You know, somebody may say the same about mine. You know, you're going to find some pertinent information in his book. So I think that's what you have to do. You have to go through what's out there and not be biased until you finish with the book, you know. But I read a book, I acquired a book earlier this year called Legacy of Deception, and it's written by an author by the name of Stephen Singular. And Stephen Singular has written 14 true crime novels over his lifetime. And one of them was about a Denver disc jockey that had been killed by the Aryan group out of Washington State or up there around northern Idaho.
Sure.
And apparently the guy's name was Berg. I think his name was Alan Berg, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a big thing. I don't know if you remember that case.
I'm familiar with the case, sure.
Okay. Well, he wrote this book called Talk to Death. And apparently when the Nicole Brown Simpson and Goldman murders took place, Singular was contacted by an insider in Los Angeles Police Department. And when he asked the individual, well, why would you choose me up in Denver? He said, because I read your book. I read your book, Talk to Death, and I want to share this with you. He alleged that this insider in the L.A. Police Department indicated, at least he was alleging, that there was a neo-Nazi faction. There was a neo-Nazi sympathizing faction in the command order of the police department that protected certain individuals and some of the conduct that they were involved in that, you know, that was improper. Let me put it like that.
Sure.
And so that insider began to give Singular information. He said O.J. Simpson's house wasn't visited one time during the night. They visited his house 2 times. The first time they went to his house was 2.5 hours before the time that they told the public that we went over to Simpson's Rockingham estate about 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning.
Okay, let me interrupt you. Do we know which cops went on the first visit? Do we have their names?
The guy didn't. Singular doesn't say that in his book, but the front of his book, because I've got the image of it right here, is he's got Mark Furman on the front of the book. Okay, now the main thing that I got from his book, because I'm not going to go off into, I believe that it's much deeper than Mark Furman. Okay, I believe that the cover-up and the collusion and all of the stuff is much deeper than Mark Furman, and it overlaps over on the defense team as well. So I'm not going to get stretched out just talking about Mark Furman. Okay, I think that he may have played a part in this whole thing, but in order to do what has been done in the Simpson case and to perpetuate this false narrative for the last 20 years, and we will probably visit it again around June 12th of this year, you had to have other people. And
right.
Not only in the police department, but in the Los Angeles District Attorney's office as well.
And the media. The media was totally controlled as well in this case.
Exactly.
Let me ask you a question, brother. Now, but to get to Mark Furman, okay, because everybody knows and everybody talks about him. Now they got this creep on Fox News all the time. Are you familiar with the stories about Mark Furman and Anthony Pellicano and the Don Simpson case and all that kind of stuff?
I hear this stuff, but I haven't wrapped myself with it. Maybe I'll get to it because stuff comes across my desk all the time. You know, I'm sitting here looking now at the name Ippolito, you know.
Well, okay, I'm not familiar with that name, but right off the bat with Furman, here's a guy. Wasn't he as a police officer? He was in 4 commands in 5 years in his early life as a police officer. Is that correct?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
He was assigned to 4 different commands within 5 years of his first 5 years as a police officer, which means
Who are you speaking of?
Mark Furman.
Okay, I'm not aware of that. I didn't know that.
He was being bounced around from precinct to precinct. He couldn't get along with anybody. He spent most of his career in traffic.
Okay.
Okay, and then he became a detective because he sued the department.
Okay.
Are you familiar with all this?
No.
Okay, well, I got a real nice little piece of gossip for you. Are you familiar with the whole situation with Anthony Pellicano? You know who Anthony Pellicano is?
Wasn't he supposedly wasn't he a private investigator himself?
Private investigator to the stars. Right now he's in prison because he was wiretapping everybody in sight, and he had explosives and C4 in his safe in his office, okay?
Right.
Everyone knows you don't keep C4 in the office.
Right.
right? Okay. But the thing is, there's a story where Don Simpson was a movie producer. He was involved with Heidi Fleiss's Girls and all that stuff like that. He was considered to be a heavy drug. He's dead now. He was considered to be a heavy drug user and user of prostitutes. And he had a party at his home. A house guest in his home died of a drug overdose. He called up Anthony Pellicano. Now, this part is documented. Anthony Pellicano came and cleaned the crime scene before they called the police. Okay. When they called the police, the first officer to show up to respond to that crime was Mark Furman.
Well, what do you want me to say?
That's a very interesting story, Ed.
You know, let me say this to you.
Go ahead.
Where it is interesting to me, I mean, based upon some other things that I've read, I'm not surprised. I think it surprises me why Lucianne Coleman, who is a deputy district attorney with Los Angeles County, was not allowed to finish her testimony on the witness stand. Now, are you acquainted with the name Lucianne Coleman?
No, I am not. I'd love to hear about this.
Okay. Lucianne Coleman was on the witness stand, and she was the person in the district attorney's office that police officers of the department would come to say, you know, there's some issues of wrongdoing you need to look at, you know, in the police department. And 2 of the people who had come to her was a police officer by the name of Purdy, who had claimed that Mark Furman had drawn swastikas on his locker and was attempting to intimidate him and had been parading around the police precinct in Nazi paraphernalia.
I'm familiar with that story.
Okay, and Purdy came and told Lucianne Coleman this information, okay? And then this stuff started coming up. I guess they had the TV on in the office at the time that he was there giving his report to her. And they were accusing Mark Furman of planting the glove. And Purdy allegedly had stated that to Lucianne Coleman, she said, "Oh, that can't be. That couldn't happen. I don't believe that." And he says, "I don't know. You know, with this individual, it's possible." Okay? Now, she also had another individual that came into the office to give his report. This is an officer, I think his name was Maxwell, and he was telling her of how Furman had been bragging about a breast job that Nicole Brown Simpson had, gotten, and that she had showed it to him, and he was telling the rest of these guys while they were standing around drinking beer and eating barbecue how nice the boob job was. Okay? So
is that actually in a police report?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's in that is in. I think that I pulled that from the partial testimony that she was giving before they had a sidebar conversation. The attorneys asked for a sidebar, both the defense and the prosecutors. Now, that sidebar didn't go on the record, so that sidebar was off the record. But once they got through talking to the judge told Lucianne Coleman, you're through. You can step down. You can go.
Amazing.
So that was about it as far as all of the conversation. But finding that is fairly easy. If you Google those names, Purdy and Maxwell, with the Los Angeles Police Department, I'm certain that it will pop up.
Another
online.
interesting thing that I found interesting is kind of what we're talking about the cops was this cop Ship. You remember the cop Ship who was OJ's friend?
Yeah.
He was in the car when Denise Brown got her drunk driving arrest.
Yep.
Yeah, right. And isn't he the one too who gave the gun that OJ had when he was on his the slow speed chase there? Where did OJ get that gun from? Was that from Ship?
You know what? I'm not going to say. I thought I heard something to that effect, but I can't say. I'm not going to attest to that.
I appreciate you being very careful and guarding your testimony here and keeping everything on the record. So my guest today, we're going to a break, my friend. Thomas Johnson, who has just done, you listen to this man, this guy has done incredible research and background. He knows the O.J. Simpson trial like the back of his hand. Time is going so fast, I'm going to beg him to come back. I want to do another couple of hours with this guy. But he's the author of Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the O.J. Simpson murder trial, and the documentary producer of Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the O.J. Simpson murder trial. Both of these books and videos are available on Amazon.com. I got the links on my website, my blog, The Opperman Report. Right back after this. Okay, welcome back to The Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman. And tonight we have as our guest Thomas Johnson, the investigative team coordinator for the Ocean Medical Group, and the author of the book Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the O.J. Simpson murder trial, and also the producer of Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the O.J. Simpson murder trial. And I just want to say that any opinions I have are my own. And, I know a lot about the case, too, and a lot of things that maybe Mr. Johnson doesn't want to go out on a limb for. Johnson doesn't want to go out on a limb, and then, he's very cautious and very professional in his detailed in his investigation, and I appreciate that. So where were we?
Well, I don't know. You have so much going on in between there, but I was going to say to you, I'm just impressed. This is the first interview I've done, and man, the time has really flown by.
I know. I was going to say that. You got to come back, man, because we got to do this again.
What I was going to say is that we probably need to touch on the significance of the title, Pursuit of Exhibit 35, or otherwise we'll probably be looking at 9 o'clock my time and 7 o'clock your time.
Go ahead, tell us. It's the phone logs. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was about, I would say it was April of 1998. Maybe it was March of 1998. I got a call from my brother. He was reviewing the autopsy reports, and he said, Tom, he said, you know, Nicole Brown Simpson's father stated in the autopsy report that the last time that he knew his daughter was alive was at 11 p.m. She was talking to her mother on the telephone. But they had turned the time back by stipulation to 9:37. And the departure time of the testimony of the waitress who waited on the Brown family at the Mezzaluna restaurant, the weekend manager, Karen Crawford, stated that they had left the restaurant at about 8:40. The overall manager, I think his name was John DeBello, he said that they had left there around 8:40. Tia Gavin, who waited on the 10 guests at the table, stated that they left there around 8:40, 8:45-ish. Okay? So,
let me interrupt. Was there a credit card receipt possibly?
Yes,
okay.
There was. But the problem in the Mezzaluna restaurant is none of the timepieces were accurate.
Gotcha.
All of them were malfunctioning. So there is no specific time that's been identified. The time has fluctuated between 8:30 and as late as 9 o'clock. John DeBello actually went to the murder site the day that the bodies were found and talked with the detectives, and he told the detectives Van Adder and Lang, either Van Adder or Lang, because it's in their report in their book. I think their book was entitled Evidence Dismissed, and in the book he states that they left the restaurant at about 9 o'clock. But the time even the time of their departure gets pushed back, so that by the time you get around to the civil trial 2 years later, Juditha Brown finally decided to testify in a trial, and she testified on December 6, 1996. So she wants to say, well, you know, we left there specifically at 8:30. So you have that time range of either 8:30, 8:40, 8:45, or 9 o'clock. But any of those times was impossible for them to make the journey between Brentwood and the far extreme end of Orange County in Dana Point within either 45 minutes or an hour period of time. They could not do it in 1994. We have finally, because of all of the publicity surrounding what we did in pursuing these phone records, ending up on Fox News, Court TV, and all of the other stuff that you see in the documentary, we finally were able to get the cooperation of the Traffic Engineering Department of the California Department of Transportation. And they gave us the traffic volume for the night of 6/12/1994 between 8 and 9 p.m. from Sunset Boulevard to La Tijera Boulevard, which is about approximately a little bit more than an 8-mile stretch. And in that 8-mile zone between 8 and 9, 35,000 automobiles travel through that 8-mile zone. But the problem is you cannot get 35,000 automobiles in an 8-mile zone across 4 or 5 lanes, depending on whichever one that you want to use there. Either one, you cannot get those amount of cars. So you have a change of about every 20 minutes that you're able to get 1/3 of the traffic through an 8-mile zone. And so in that situation there, you have if you have a set of cars traveling through that zone of 8 miles in 20 minutes, that would imply that they would be traveling through 24 miles in an hour. So the speedometer rating would be, our estimate was about 24.5 miles per hour. Subsequently, we got the average speed from the California Department of Transportation. Their average speed through that zone before the HOV lanes were completed was 29 miles per hour. So we're still in the ballpark there, in my opinion, because the Brown family lives 70 miles away from the Mesaluna restaurant in Brentwood. If you're saying that it went there in an hour, it implies that the traffic odometer rating had to be 70 miles per hour from door to door.
Right.
And that includes the 19 stoplights on the surface streets. That includes the 3 90-degree turns from the Mesaluna restaurant to get on the 405 on Wilshire Boulevard. That includes the right-hand turn off of Crown Valley Parkway and down that steep San Joaquin Hill, or mountain, if you're from the Midwest, and the 14 stoplights. And the stoplight had to be green when you shot across the Pacific Coast Highway, and the guard shack gate and those metal spikes that rip your tires up had to be anticipating that you were coming through the gate as well at 70 miles per hour. Well, the problem is, if you have any speed that falls below 70 miles per hour, as we had in that 8-mile zone between Wilshire Boulevard and La Tijera Boulevard, whatever the difference is, you have to add it on top of 70 miles per hour. So if you have a 29 mile per hour, let's round it off at 30 miles per hour for the 8 miles from Sunset Boulevard or Wilshire Boulevard to La Tijera Boulevard, now you've got to take the difference, 40 miles per hour, and put it on 70 miles per hour to at least go for a consistent 8 miles. And now you've got a car traveling at 110 miles per hour for a consistent 8 miles to maintain that average of being able to get there in that hour's period of time in order for them to make the phone call back at 9:37. So that's where we began having problems.
Well, can I just say something? I hope the audience appreciates the amount of work, the amount of time and investigative work that went into a testimony like Mr. Tom Johnson just gave us to get these records from the Department of Traffic, and then to go and count all these street lights and do all this kind of work to come up with a testimony like he just gave us. How many times have you driven down that route?
We've driven down there several times, and I've interviewed the officers from the California Highway Patrol that govern that stretch of highway, from the barracks that governs that stretch of highway. I've interviewed livery services, people who pick you up at the airport and take you where you have to go in limousines. If you look on page, I think it's on page 28 of Detective Van Adder and Tom Lang's book, you will see them state in their book that the Brown family lived at least 90 minutes away from here. Anybody that you talk to will tell you that the distance, the time that it takes you to drive between Brentwood and Dana Point is approximately an hour and a half. Back in 1994, that time stretched out even longer in many instances, from an hour and a half to 2 hours, because when we were finally able to get the cooperation of the California traffic engineers of the California Department of Transportation, they told us there was no way they could have made that night. And I said, well, why? She said, because we were in year 2 of creating the HOV system, and we had the construction zones were 15 miles long, and you couldn't go through those construction zones over 30 miles per hour. So because those construction zones between Long Beach and this side of Long Beach coming back into L.A. County, and an equal distance on the other side of Long Beach going into Orange County, were 15 miles long, that slowed the traffic down, and built up the traffic volume and built up the traffic density. The traffic volume was already enormous, but it built up the traffic density and packed it up line.
Okay,
and so that's what slowed it up back further up north towards Brentwood, where they couldn't travel beyond about 29 miles per hour.
So the point doesn't get lost, though. What is the reason? What is the significance? Because it's the timing of the phone call. Go ahead.
The significance of this is that if you look at the testimony of the limousine driver, he states that O.J. Simpson came out of the house. They went and they checked on a knock on the wall or something that Cato had been talking about, and then he got into the car between 11 o'clock and 5 minutes after 11. And from that point, they had to rush to the airport, but Simpson had to show him how to get out of that area of Brentwood to get on the freeway in order to get to LAX to catch an 11:45 flight to Chicago. So if she was on the phone at 11 o'clock talking to her mother, O.J. Simpson was in the back seat of a chauffeur-driven limousine at 11 o'clock being chauffeured to the Los Angeles International Airport.
Well, then, Thomas, all they got to do is produce the phone records, correct?
Well, this is the title of the book, Pursuit of Exhibit 35. And that itself, has been a merry-go-round. I made an appointment in December 2nd, 1998. I contacted the manager over the Simpson file, and I said, well, is the file still sealed? She said, no. Most of it is free to review. So I came there and met with the lady at 10 o'clock in the morning, and, she was very feisty. She said, listen, this is the O.J. Simpson file. It's about 7 feet high and about 6 feet wide, this file cabinet. Now, if you don't know what you want, I don't have all day to be here with you. And I said, well, I know exactly what I'm looking for. So as soon as I said that, she shoved this group of papers with dates on it, and she says, look through these dates and see if you can find the date you're looking for. So I go through it, and then I said to her, no, I don't see the date I'm looking for here. And she says, okay, well, go through this set of documents. She pulled out another thick set, about an inch thick, from behind her back, and she gave those to me. And it just so happened the date that I was looking for was right on top. I said, here it is, June 30th, 1994, the first day of the preliminary hearing. She says, I was concerned about that. I said, well, what's wrong? She said, everything in this pile that I've given to you has been sealed by the court. And I said, well, why would they seal the first day of the preliminary hearing? They don't know where the case is going to go. She says, well, I don't know why they sealed it, but they did. And Judge Ito has made it very difficult for any journalists or researchers to get into these dates, period. And that's when I said to her, well, I believe I know why he did it. And so she said to me facetiously, yeah, you know why? Why don't you tell me? And I said, well, I'm going to tell you by asking you a question. I said, do you know where Brentwood is? And she says, no. I said, it's a bedroom community to Santa Monica. She said, well, I know where Santa Monica is. I said, do you know where Dana Point is located? She says, no. I said, do you know where San Juan Capistrano? She said, oh, yes. Me and my husband have gone there on 4 or 5 occasions. I said, well, Dana Point is a bedroom community just to the north of San Juan Capistrano. I said, now, when you and your husband have gone down there, where have you gone from? She says, well, we live in Long Beach. And when she said that, my heart sank, because she was kind of a difficult lady in the beginning, so I thought that now I'm going to have to add time on it, because Brentwood is in Los Angeles, but it's much further to the north and to the west of Long Beach, which is right on the border of, you cross the street and you're in the Orange County. But I thought I would gamble anyway, so I said, well, how long does it take you when you and your husband have gone down there? She says, oh, every time my husband and I have gone to San Juan Capistrano, it's taken us 2 hours. And when she told me that, I said, okay. I said, let me show you something. I said, if we left here from downtown at this Superior Courthouse, how long do you think it would take us to get down to San Juan Capistrano? She says it would take us at least 3 hours. I said, well, if you take the testimony of all of the witnesses that waited on the family in the restaurant on the night of June 12, 1994, the time that they said that they departed the restaurant at 8:45 and the time that the attorneys behind closed doors decided to stipulate to 9:37, that gives them a little bit more than 45 minutes to reach down there close to San Juan Capistrano from a distance that is much further away from where you and your husband were. And she kind of blew her stack at that time. She said, hell no, they didn't do that. You wait here. I'll be right back. And then she went somewhere and she came back and she said, you know what? They still got those dates sealed. She said, but they've been leaking stuff on the Simpson case all along, going in these files, doing whatever they want. She said, you know what, I'm going to help you. Didn't you tell me that this was entered as an exhibit? I said, yes. The phone records were entered as Exhibit 35. She says, I got news for you. Exhibits cannot be sealed. So I'm going to call a sheriff's deputy over here. He's going to take you down to the exhibit department, which is in the sub-basement, and you speak to the head of the exhibit department, which is the custodian of records. So I went down there, walked the line, went back there, went through the security, went into the exhibit department, and there were so many people gathered around. It was during the era that if you even mentioned the Simpson case, you know, it created all types of negative looks and this and that. So I knew the case file number. So when I asked to speak to the custodian of records, I said to her, I'm Thomas Johnson from the Ocean Medical Investigative Group. I'd like to examine evidence in case file number 94097211. And then she stopped and she said, I know that you would. She said, that's the OJ Simpson case. And then everybody stopped. About 20 people in the room stopped, like E.F. Hutton was about to speak. And I said, yeah, I would. She says, well, I got news for you. All of the evidence in the O.J. Simpson case file has been removed from the exhibit department. And I said, ma'am, there were over 1,000 exhibits entered during his trial. She said, we know that. She said, but they're gone now. I said, who would want to come and take those out of here? She said the Deputy District Attorney, William Hodgman, came down here with an ex parte court order from a judge and removed all of the evidence from the Simpson case file. And so she said, then she said something that was interesting, and it kind of loosened the tension of all of these other people. She said, but you know, that guy Hodgman, he thinks he's slick. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? We prepared a receipt manifest for him to itemize everything that he was removing from the department, and he refused to sign the receipt manifest. He doesn't have a signature on this receipt. And everybody in the room, they started shaking their head, affirming what she had said. She says, but we know who took all of the evidence out of this courthouse. And with that, I asked her, I said, when I go back to my office, I would like to write you a formal letter. And once I write you, will you provide me the same information that we have talked about today? And she says, if you write me, I'll give you everything. And if you go to my book, Pursuit of Exhibit 35, you will see the exhibit manifest that they prepared for William Hodgman, who had been promoted since that time to assistant DA, which there's only 3 of them in L.A. County at last count. So he moved up from the 1,800 pool of deputies to one of the top 3 assistant DAs. Now, I don't know, maybe he was entitled to the promotion, but it certainly was, some fascinating timing of him receiving the promotion. I also received from her a copy of the judge's court order. And what was interesting about that court order from that particular judge, whose name is John Reed, we filed a group of documents.
My friend, we have a break coming up.
Okay.
So we have with us Thomas Johnson, who's the author of Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson Murder Trial. And he's telling us now about how he's trying to get a copy of these phone records that would demonstrate that it was impossible, because this is Nicole's mother and father calling up the phone at 11 p.m., and OJ was in a limousine at 11 p.m. We'll be back right after this. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Ed Opperman, private investigator. I'm the author of the book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, which is available on Amazon.com and also on my website, emailrevealer.com. And it's a listener-sponsored station, so if you want to support the station, if you're listening on YouTube, please visit the website, freedomslips.com, and click on the donate button. We're here tonight with Thomas Johnson, who's the author of Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson Murder Trial, and also the producer of a documentary called Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson murder trial. And I really love the video. There's a lot of archival news and video stuff, but the good stuff, not the stuff you see all the time over and over whenever they talk about OJ. This is a lot of good detailed stuff. So Thomas, we only got about a half hour, got about 26 minutes left, my friend. So I want you to kind of summarize the whole situation with the phone records, and then please, if you could we get into a little bit about Ron Goldman and about his criminal record and possible informant status, and also, too, the stuff about the serial killer.
You really, wow. I've got to learn how to condense this stuff. But anyway, let's deal with, we're going that way in terms of the serial killer.
Okay.
I said to you that we filed a large stack of exhibit documents in an attempt to get the phone records from the parent corporation of GTE Communications, which was in Texas, and their legal archive department is in San Angelo, Texas. Well, the judge more or less threw us out of Texas, and in our request for reconsideration, he says, I know that y'all can find another federal court of competent jurisdiction. And so, that in essence to us meant that take this stuff back to California. We don't want it in the venue of Texas in this jurisdiction, so take it back out there. But in the meantime, the Internet was on fire. This was back around 1999, and everybody was either pro-J or no-J,
Right.
This or he didn't do it, and then blah, 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 back and forth, heated. And so...
Yeah, on Usenet. I was there.
Right. So in the midst of all of this stuff, I was basically monitoring it. I wasn't participating, but I was monitoring what was being said. And so someone had picked up on the fact that we had filed in the district court in Lubbock, Texas, to acquire the phone records, and somebody came on and says, well, this judge that issued this court order, this is the same judge that sealed the records on this serial killer named Glenn Rogers. And he also sealed the records of this deputy DA, didn't he, named D'Agostino. So that was news to me, but it was a new lead that I had to follow, because now you're connecting that to the Simpson case. And subsequently, over the next year, I think, that I finally got an opportunity to request and review the death row appeal file of Glenn Rogers, and they were trying to conceal it. But I guess in the manner that the information was given to me to request it, they brought a special clerk down, and the clerk didn't ask any questions. She didn't talk to the young clerk that was stumbling through it. She just said, "Come with me." And so I walked with her, went down the hallway. She set me at this desk, and then she wheeled in the first grocery cart full of stuff on Glenn Rogers. And then she wheeled in a second grocery cart. So I was there from like 1:30 till 4:30 in the afternoon in the L.A. Superior Court. And so as I went through it in that first file, I noticed that it kept repeating these medical reports by these medical doctors. And these medical doctors were saying, this man, Glenn Rogers, suffers from this disease that has a toxic effect on his brain called acute intermittent porphyria, Mad King George's disease, okay? And about the time that we got to closing, I asked one of the clerks, I said, why don't you make a copy of this picture of his family for me? And she says, well, it's going to cost $2. I said, that's all right. She said, well, let me talk to my supervisor so I can make sure it's clear. So the supervisor comes back, the lady who had brought me in and set me down. She says, you can't make a copy of this. And I said, well, why not? She says, everything that's in this file, this stamp PC 187, I wasn't even supposed to allow you to see this. Now, you could review everything in this file, but by right, I wasn't supposed to give you this file over here. So she takes that grocery cart and wheels it away. I still had a little bit of time between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, so I started paging through this stuff in the second file. It might as well have been Sunday coupons in the Sunday newspaper. Wasn't nothing, okay? I left that court, and I said, well, who instructed you on this? And then she handed me this document, and here it was. The same judge that facilitated or abetted the removal of all the evidence in the Simpson file was the same judge in the same time frame that had sealed this guy's criminal case file with these medical doctors' reports, where these doctors seemed like they was, what's the word, cover your CYA, covering their behinds, okay? That if you kill this guy, let it be on record that we've said and put in his file that this man suffers from a disease that causes insanity. And as you know, in this country, we certainly shouldn't be putting people that are insane to death, although in some of these states they get away with it. It's a violation of the Eighth Amendment. Within the next day, I went to the county commissioner's office I went there to check on this other file by this deputy district attorney, D'Agostino, and found out I was expecting that to be sealed, but they said, no, it's not sealed. You can review it. So I spent the whole 5 days. I spent 5 days, Monday through Friday, reviewing all of that. And what that was, she had filed a grievance before the Civil Service Commission protesting the fact that she, who was responsible for getting Glenn Rogers off of death row in Florida and coming back to California to stand trial, she had pulled off 1,000,000 to 1 feet, because normally that doesn't happen. Once you've been sentenced to death row in a particular state, you cannot be extradited to another state. That has to be by special request of a governor to governor. And maybe it was a political favor owed to her by Pete Wilson that he was able to talk with Lawton Childs, and they worked it out, spent a lot of money to get this guy to come back and stand trial. This guy was on death row in Florida for murdering 4 women that we're aware of, but when they interviewed him the second day that they had captured him, and you see the capturing in the documentary, so on and so forth.
Right.
He says, 4? I've killed more like 74, okay? And so this guy, was not supposed to get off of death row to be brought back to California. But once the DA's office found out that he was coming back to California, they sent their lieutenants in the DA's office out to this district attorney's office in Van Nuys and went through her desk and everything else and said, you're not on this case anymore. You're off. Okay? Now, in that file that she, in her civil service grievance proceeding, she was stating that her investigators had found out that this individual had been in close proximity to OJ Simpson's wife, Nicole Brown Simpson.
Wait, who said that?
And I didn't hear you.
Oh, who said that he was connected to OJ Simpson's wife?
The Deputy District Attorney Leah D'Agostino.
Okay.
The woman that they took off of prosecuting him once he brought him back to California. You don't even know when this guy's trial took place. When have you ever heard of a major celebrity serial killer trial in California and you haven't even heard of it? You didn't even know that he had a trial. And that's what it was said in the documents that was in her file, that the district attorney and them told her, said, don't think that we're going to allow this guy to remain on death row in California. We're going to have his trial, but once we get done with it, we're shipping him back to death row in Florida. Okay? That's all in that file. Now, I see that, I go through that, I read this stuff, then I get a call about a month later. And the lady who had allowed me to see the file, she was kind of, at a point of having a nervous breakdown. She says, all of that stuff that you saw, I wasn't supposed to allow you to see. She said, but I was on vacation when they brought that stuff in here. That stuff was supposed to be sealed by order of this judge, the same judge, John H. Reed, the same judge that abetted the removal of the Simpson evidence, the same judge that sold the medical evidence of Glenn Rogers' affliction of Mad King George's disease, is the same judge that has sealed this woman's civil servant's grievance. And so the woman tells me that whoever brought that information in just threw it on the back desk, in the back room, in the closet.
All right.
She says, that's not the way it was supposed to be sealed, so how could I know? And I said, well, I'm not going to cause you any trouble, as far as that goes. You didn't know, but I don't know what you want me to do. I can't erase what I've seen. But most of the stuff that led to Nicole Brown Simpson's doorstep, it seemed to be redacted. Every time it say, well, he came up to the fence, then it would have black magic mark wiping it out. So that's what caused me to get in contact with Glenn Rogers on death row in Florida. And he was the one who initially said, yes, I knew all of those people. He said, but I can't talk to you. You don't seem like you want too much, because I didn't come at him straight, the way that I came at him and said, I was reviewing your file, and it appears to me that these people have concealed the fact that you suffer from a very serious a disease that causes insanity. I said, did they ever use that in your defense to save you from the death penalty? And so something about that caught his attention. And he says, I'm going to send some people to you, and the people that he sent to us, that we met with, told us that Glenn had told them that he had been with Nicole. And I said to them that the road seems to stop at Nicole's doorstep. It seemed like he was a painter at her house. He said, yeah. His brother said, yes, he was a painter. He painted her house. He said, but my brother was going with Nicole. And I said, well, how can you prove that? He says, my brother took a picture with Nicole at the House of Blues shortly before she was killed. And I said, you know, I certainly would like to get a copy of it. They said, we gave the photo to the civil defense team for Simpson. And so when we asked to get the photo back, they claimed that, you know, they had seen it, but they didn't know where it was anymore.
Wow.
And that's that. Now, what kind of
now, let me ask you a question, though, because now since you came up with this information way back, 2000, correct?
Right. I came up with it in 1999, but coming at me so hard, and we were dealing with other issues. So I said, well, I don't want to wait off of it. This guy is a killer. I don't have all of these people on. I don't have my security staff at the level that I need it at.
Right.
I don't want to go that way yet. So
let me ask you this, though, because there's recently
about 6 months before I made the opportunity for these other people to meet with us.
But my point is, you had this in 1999. There's been another book written about this recently, like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, where did he get his information from you?
Well, when you say another book written about
Rogers,
about Glenn Rogers, or are you talking about the documentary that came out last year, My Brother the Serial Killer?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah. Now, where did he get his information from?
He's a brother.
Well, he didn't get it from... Glenn has 6 brothers and 1 sister.
Gotcha.
And that brother there is not the one that they consider to be the most trustworthy. And Glenn was... Well, I'm not going to trip about the brother.
Okay.
I got a problem with the producer. The producer is a British fellow. He called me several times, and he communicated with me by email. I found out this year I was able to access my old email account, and I thought it was like 8 or 9 times. It was like 20 times. I told him the most significant thing about Glenn Rogers is that he suffers from this blood disease called porphyria. But he suffers from the acute form, acute intermittent porphyria. So he doesn't suffer from the one that causes skin lesions and so forth. He suffers from the one where it's an overproduction of this iron enzyme that goes directly to the brain. And once the toxic effects take over the brain, he immediately goes into a psychotic behavior. You know, he's paranoid, schizophrenia, he can be violent, bipolar, everything that makes him violent. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Madness of King George, but if you see that movie, you'll see what I'm referring to in that particular instance.
I'm familiar with it.
It is a very, very insidious disease, you know, and I feel that if this guy was in close proximity to Nicole and the authorities knew about it, then he should have been detained, but wasn't detained. And there's a question that has always lingered in our mind, why wasn't he detained? Well, one of the reasons we believe that he wasn't detained is because this guy was one of the top undercover confidential informants working with law enforcement across this nation. And he was good. And the only one that came to his murder trial in Florida and testified somewhat on his behalf was a narcotics officer that he used to report to that said that this man was one of the best undercover informants that we've ever had. He's made hundreds of cases, and he's never blown his cover.
Okay, man, I tell you, we only got Thomas. We only got about 8 minutes left. So
what do you want me to do, man? The book is 500 pages long.
I know. Well, listen, there's a couple of things we can do, because we do an after show where you and I can talk after the show, and we can take some calls, too, if you have time after the show.
All right.
Okay, but in the meantime, for the audience that's listening live now, give us a summary, man, of everything you think. What do you think happened here? Who do you think did it? Just what you can squeeze in about 8 minutes, my friend.
Well, you know, That's not how we work. We don't. This is why my brother, I think, nominated me to be what the title that I have, investigative team coordinator, because much of the Simpson case, particularly this narrative that has been promulgated throughout the 20 years, is based upon nothing more than subjective hearsay. The journalists have gone before on the microphone and broadcast to millions of people based upon hearsay. They have done no due diligence. They have not examined the irregularities in the evidence, and thus, once they get caught and backed up in the corner, they don't want to confront their mistakes, and they certainly don't want to have someone like myself or other members of our investigative team on their programs. So that's what we've been battling with for many, many years. I cannot tell you who killed these individuals. I can tell you who should have been detained in regard to killing these individuals. I think that Glenn Rogers, based upon the fact that he was a serial killer, and 3 of the 4 women that he's on death row for now were killed in the same manner as Nicole Brown Simpson, because we have the autopsy reports from Mississippi concerning Linda Price. We have the autopsy report from Tampa, Florida, concerning Tina Cribbs. And if I'm not mistaken, we have the autopsy report from Bossier City, Louisiana, where he killed the woman in Louisiana. Those women were killed in a similar manner of stabbing and slitting by a person that knew where to cut you, where you would bleed out, similar to the manner of how Nicole Brown Simpson was killed. So from that standpoint, I would say that Glenn Rogers should have at least been detained. And I believe that law enforcement officials knew that he was within, radar range of Nicole Brown Simpson, and why they didn't detain him and take us down this myriad trail of OJ Simpson, this contemporary Othello who was fanatically infatuated with this young white woman that he went crazy and over the edge and killed her. That became the narrative. That was the narrative that was given to us by the late Dominic Dunn based upon his attending an opera of Othello. So that's what we had, and that's what they've continued to shove down your throat since then. And that's sad. That's unfortunate. And that has some old stereotypical racial connotations to it. But it certainly doesn't reflect objective investigation. And so what I tell all of the investigators that are associated with our team, nothing and no one is given the privilege of presumption. All evidence must come to the table, and it must be able to stand on its own merit. We don't deal with anything but objective evidence. If you've got an opinion, a subjective opinion, and that's what you want to come in at the end of the day, then you don't need to be here. So that's why I can safely say to you, I can't tell you who killed these people, but I can tell you that Glenn Rogers should have been detained, and I also believe that Marvin Glass out of Illinois, who was married to Fred Goldman's present wife, who was charged with attempted murder of his business partner, was also charged under the RICO statutes of being a major drug kingpin in Illinois, who was facing 210 years in the federal penitentiary until they flipped him. And because he was willing to cooperate and become a confidential informant and wear a wire, and particularly wear a wire so that the feds could make the biggest case that they've ever made in terms of bringing down judges that take bribes in Illinois, the Operation Greylord case, the man was able to reduce his sentence from 200 years down to 8 years. Well, he happened to be in Los Angeles in close proximity to the Goldman family at the same time that Ron Goldman was killed, because 2 days after Ron's body was found was the date that Marvin Glass's daughter was graduating from middle school, and he was out there at that time. I think that Fred Goldman, Ron Goldman's father, who you see on television protesting all the time, is quite disingenuous. For a man to be able to write a book 300 pages long and mention this man 8 times in that book and avoid ever mentioning his actual name suggests to me that he's acting in a disingenuous manner. You see, this guy, Marvin Glass, when he was being sentenced by the judge.
Okay, I'm sorry, my friend. Okay, we're going to have an after show.
Okay.
My guest tonight was Thomas Johnson, author of Pursuit of Exhibit 35 and the OJ Simpson Murder Trial, and he's the producer of a documentary called Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson trial. We're going to have an after show, so you can call in and ask questions of Mr. Johnson here in his investigation. I want to thank you, Thomas. This is incredible work. Just incredibly thorough work. Everybody in the chat room wants you to come back. They're all saying, come back, have him back on.
Well, I want to say thank you for having me on. I never thought that we were going to. I thought it was going to drag on.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Oh, you got some good info, bro.